This is the Troutbitten Podcast.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
Troutbitten?
Yeah, Troutbitten.
Troutbitten.
It's about trout.
Wild trout. This is Troutbitten. This is the Troutbitten Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. So the weather and the seasons have changed, and the fish are moving into their fall rhythms. It's a good time to be alive. I hope you're getting out there and putting a pile of trout in the net lately. I'm Dominic Swantowski, owner of Troutbitten and author of Troutbitten.com, where you can find over 700 articles with tactics, stories, and commentaries about fishing for trout on a fly rod. Today, we are talking about fly fishing with the Mono Rig. This will be a good one. I have four of my closest fishing friends with me, whom we'll introduce in a moment. And we want to break down or sort of summarize the ultimate versatility of this amazing tool. The Mono Rig is a hybrid system for fishing all types of flies. Nymphs, both tight line and indicator styles, streamers, dry dropper, wets, and small dry flies. With 20-pound monofilament as a fly line substitute, better contact, control, and strike detection are gained with the Mono Rig versus a traditional fly line approach. And yet, the casting here is still a fly line style cast. Ironically, it takes excellent fly casting skills to efficiently throw a Mono Rig. The Mono Rig is similar to tight line and Euro nymphing styles. However, it's a full system for fishing all fly types with and without indicators, with and without split shot. The Mono Rig is a very versatile tool, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Since 2014, I've written hundreds of articles on Troutbitten about the Mono Rig. Many of them are in series form, so they read like chapters in a book. And in this podcast, there's no way we have time to explain it all. But that's not the goal today. Instead, what I'd like to do is highlight the versatility of a rig that every one of my friends here uses. We all fish similar mono rigs with some variation, and we all use it in different ways too. Some are slight and some are major. I'm sure we'll do more podcasts with this topic in the future, but by the end of this episode, I'd like you to have a full picture of what the Mono Rig really is and all of the things that you can do with it, all the options, all the versatility. All right, so let me introduce my friends and ask some questions. Here's Austin Dando. How's it going, bud?
Good, man.
I got one for you. Hey, tell us about your worst fall-in ever.
Oh, first one that comes to mind was junior year of college. Was in a good-sized river and was crossing, decided to cross it. I had a group of friends with me, and there's a bridge that went over the creek, and it was high water, and they decided they would hike up the side of the hill and take the bridge across. And I decided that was too much, and I could probably get across on my own. So that's what I tried to do. And as I watched them cross over on the bridge, I walked into a big rock I did not see. And took a good crash into the water. Not total head under, but, up to the neck. And I did not have a spare set of clothes. My friends were the ones who drove me there. They didn't want to go home. So what did I do? I took off my wool sweater and I made a fire on the island. And
You did.
Yes.
You burned your sweater.
Well, no. I dried it out.
You burned his sweater.
I fished most of the rest of the day in a t-shirt because, my small island fire didn't do a lot.
That's great.
It wasn't that bad. It was more or less just a fun memory, I guess.
That's a bad fall-in.
Yeah, it was February.
If you're building fires, to warm up, that's pretty bad.
It was 30 or less, but...
Yeah, that's bad.
That is a full fall-in, too.
Bad,
yeah. And just to clarify, what's a fall-in? What constitutes a fall-in, guys?
I think Bill made a good point one time when we were talking about it, and he said something like, if you were on dry land, what would have happened? Would you have hit the floor or not?
Right.
I think over your waders.
Right.
I think if it's not over your waders, it's all fair. No,
if I just put my hand down,
you lost balance.
If I get wet up to my elbow, I didn't fall in.
Yeah, who cares?
If you take on water, you just fell in.
You just fell in.
That's right. You just fell in. All right. Hey, good. Here's Trevor Smith. What's up, Dr. Smith?
How we doing tonight?
All right. Here's your question.
Good.
Is it a creek or a crick?
No, it's a creek.
I know. For you, it's a creek.
No, it's a creek.
Where'd you grow up? Where'd you grow up, Trevor?
I grew up in Warren, Pennsylvania, and up there it might be a creek, but creek is what I grew up knowing. I read books and I'm an educated
the
man.
English language is not that difficult to read.
It's a creek. Yeah.
I'm from the illiterate Western Pennsylvania, where we say
there
crick.
you go.
Now,
Yeah,
put me in deer camp for a couple weeks.
It's a huge crick.
I'm a crick guy. Trevor, have you thought about, maybe changing your pronunciation?
Nope. I'm sticking to it. I like creek, stream, river. There's no cricks in my vocabulary.
Anyway. All right, so here's Josh Darling.
Yeah.
He's the father of just a few days old baby Fletcher Brooks Darling. Right. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, how's everything going over there?
Real good. Not a lot of sleep, but real good.
Right. Because how many other kids do you have?
We have 2 other kids. So we got 3. We have 3 under 3 right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. See.
Oh yeah.
Nearly physically impossible. But
somehow.
Where there's a will.
Where there's a will.
Anyway, we're moving. Hey, Josh, who or what is Houdini?
I feel like someone put you up to this.
I know. Ready, go.
All right, this is a night fishing story. It's a good one. If you want to hear more night fishing stories, listen to last week's episode on the mouse emerger. What do we call it?
Mouse
emerger concept,
where you told us about Excalibur and
so we're gonna tell the story of another namer tonight.
Yep.
Yeah, this is Austin Dando.
It's a little less flattering story.
It is. It's certainly less flattering to me.
Yeah.
This is the story of Austin Dando's namer. So Trevor and I, this is last summer. Actually, Trevor and I were fishing often at night together, and we convinced Austin to come with us. It was very late in the night, and we were fishing a spot that we had particular confidence in. This was a spot that had proven it held really good fish, and the conditions were thus that we expected some action. And so Austin and I waded in together, really probably only 30 yards from each other, fishing pretty close. And I actually got into a pretty good fish. I was fighting it, and I was landing it when the water by Austin just erupted, and he hooked into a even bigger fish.
Chaos.
Yeah, it was chaos. There was a lot of noise for a silent night because I had a big fish in the net, and Austin was hooping and hollering with a large fish on the end of his line.
Nice.
Yep. Rightly so. That's a feeling like not very many others.
Right on.
When you get when that happens.
Yeah,
so,
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, he got it netted, and we had already confirmed that mine was not a namer. So in the Troutbitten crew, a namer is 24 inches or bigger.
Yeah.
We had confirmed that mine was 22 inches, and is 22 inches is not something to scoff at for sure. I was very happy with that, but his was bigger, and we knew his was bigger, and we thought this one might make the cut. So we got the measuring tape out real quick. I always have a measuring tape. Trevor carries the measuring tape. He's the doctor. It's a medical measuring tape.
That's right.
Yep, exactly. It is. It
accurate.
Absolutely is.
Yeah.
Baby's head circumference and the length of trout.
So Austin's fish was bigger, and so we actually wanted to swap nets because the net that we had netted Austin's fish in was not quite big enough to handle him. And so we swapped nets, and so the net that Austin's fish was in my hands, and we were getting ready to measure. So that was our first mistake.
Mistake number one.
So I lifted his fish out of the water, and we got a measurement on him, and it was like 24 on the dot. It was a namer, and in that moment, jealousy overtook me. I'm just kidding. No, but in that moment, he gained some life, got some spunk back, and made a move. And he got out of my hands, and it was a depressing moment. But that was just for me because Austin did not realize what had happened
because it's dark.
Because he was looking down at the net that he was holding, like I've still got my fish.
That's the thing.
Not realizing that my fish was in his net, and I had been holding his namer. And so I'm pretty sure that I suggested that his name be Houdini. And so not only did I release his namer, but I named it.
And may I point out, I never actually touched the fish.
Yeah, this is true.
I hooked it. Trevor landed it. You guys did something with it together, and then Josh let it go.
Something with it.
You know, until tonight, I forgot you even caught it, Austin.
Hey, Trevor, have you caught a namer at night yet?
Come on.
Hey, now.
Poor guy.
I did it on one of my first tries.
The wounds are raw.
I think that Austin, this was like one of your first times night fishing. So it sounds like jealousy could have been a factor here. Like maybe Trevor and Josh both conspired against you.
Yeah.
Listen, I haven't caught a night namer, and I put Austin in the best spot at the best time of night. So what does that? What does that say?
Yes.
I have no
exactly.
I have no excuse.
But I remember looking up at Josh being like, "Oh, bummer, man, your fish got away." No, that's not what happened.
No.
If you go here, and then just to add insult to injury, right after that, Josh lifted his fish out of the water and took some nice pictures with it. And I watched along the bank, and if you look at the Wiggle and Hang article, that is the fish that Josh caught on the cover.
And there's no picture of Houdini. Right. It's like it never existed.
Did you catch it on the Pendragon?
Yeah.
Yes.
Neat.
Right off the bank.
So it was a fly that I tied too.
Yep.
He pretty much caught
Trevor may have.
I gave him a bunch of Pendragons.
It probably was Trevor.
Yeah, Trevor outfitted me. He gave me a box full of flies.
Yeah, that's
awesome. Like, here's how we night fish.
No, honestly, this is something
you tie
that
it on for me, sir.
Austin was kind enough to forgive me.
Well, we waited
for that.
in the parking lot for about a half an hour for you to tie your blood knots. Remember that?
I don't forget. Yeah, I think I even took some of your 10-pound Maxima or whatever it was. I don't remember.
That's right.
Pretty thick rope.
This is something that I've needed to get off my chest. I feel like if the whole world knows about my error, then I can get over it.
Well, I knew a little bit about it, and then a couple times ago when you and I fished, I had a decent fish on. You said, "You want me to net that?" I said, "No, I got it.
No.
I got it.
No.
I got this.
You will not come near my fish."
No,
I know how this
really
story
good
goes.
at netting them.
Yeah. That's how that goes.
Yeah. See, I took care of that part. I did a good job.
No, Trevor's the hero in the story.
Yep, that was fun.
Absolutely.
That was fun.
I love it.
Yep.
Hey, let's bring in Bill here. Hey, how many rivers and streams have you fished this year? I know you keep count.
Ooh.
So this year I decided to keep track. Kind of the root of it was to try to force myself to fish new water and explore new streams. And so this year my count is up to 95 rivers and streams that I've fished.
That is a ton.
Some are small, some are big, some I've caught fish out of. I think all but about 3 or 4 of them I've actually caught fish out of. It's not in search of big fish. I like catching and learning new places where wild fish live. I think that's what drives a lot of the exploration.
Right on.
For
like
me.
I've known you long enough to know that you always kind of have something you're working on. Really, I think all of us are that way. I feel like I'm that way. And and that's how fishing, trout fishing for us kind of stays fresh, and there's always something to work on. There's always something new to learn and talk about with each other. I love it. All right, before we really dig into the versatility of the mono rig, let's take a quick break. We'll be back in a few seconds. Fulling Mill is the world's leading producer of flies, fly boxes, hooks, beads, and tippet. Known for their barbless hooks, they have many of your favorite trout patterns tied barbless. Not only that, they feature patterns from anglers like George Daniel, Pat Weiss, Josh Miller, Joe Goodspeed, and many others from around the world. Every pattern is backed by the 200% Fulling Mill guarantee. If a fly isn't up to the highest standards that you expect, they will replace it with 2 that are. Stock up at fullingmill.com or ask for the flies at your local dealer. Okay, guys, let me start out by defining the terms a bit. In 2016, I wrote an article on Troutbitten titled "The Mono Rig and Why Fly Line Sucks." I truly thought I would get a wave of resistance from the community, but the opposite was true. People were very hungry for this information and really receptive to some new ideas combined with old principles. They still are. And I think the fly fishing community is even more open and technically interested than ever before. So I've continued to write about the mono rig a lot. I give presentations on the topic. I answer questions about it every day. There are hundreds of articles on the website, and I dare say Troutbitten sort of popularized the term mono rig. I started writing about all this around the same time that Euro nymphing became a big thing. And I think the mono rig sort of gets thrown into that group of nymphing tactics. Czech, Polish, French, Spanish nymphing, and more. But there are differences in all of those. And importantly, I believe, the mono rig is a more complete and more versatile system than any of these others because it kind of includes everything, which is what we're going to get to in our conversation, that versatility. Someone once told me they thought I called it the mono rig because one rig could do it all. That's pretty good. But no, I simply call it a mono rig because we use monofilament for the casting. I picked up the term from a Joe Humphreys book, Trout Tactics, where he writes about a mono rig in depth in multiple sections of his book. But Joe's rig is a bit different than mine. Just like all the guys here have some differences too. Notably, I added a sighter to Humphrey's rig, and I'm pretty strict about having no taper under the water. Just 4X or just 5X, for example. So that's a mono rig. It's a hybrid system for fishing all fly types, using a leader long enough to keep the fly line on the spool, out of the air, and out of the rod guides. Importantly, I use a 20-pound monofilament. Mine's Maxima Chameleon for the long butt section. This piece does most of the work. It substitutes for a fly line, and it casts like a fly line, if you treat it that way. It has enough mass to cast itself and push flies to a target. The 20-pound mono has power. I mean, you can stand in the parking lot and cast my standard mono rig with no flies, making fly line style loops out to about 40 feet. And yet, because it's just a quarter of the weight of a standard 4-weight fly line, the mono rig sags way less, and that is the critical advantage. So this is not a system for lobbing weights around. You can set up a mono rig that way, but that is limiting. I do use a variety of rigs, some thinner, some with a longer taper at different times for different reasons. But what I call the Troutbitten standard mono rig is a tool that allows me to take the tight line advantage to all fishing styles. So guys, first of all, what styles do you fish with a mono rig?
Gosh, feels like pretty much all of them.
Yeah.
It very rarely, rarely leaves my line, and the only exception is generally with a hatch that seems worthy of making the switch.
Yeah, a hatch meaning dry flies on top. Yeah, rising trout. Sure.
Yeah, and one of the things I early kind of loved about the mono rig was it was something I could take into a hatch a day fishing in the spring in Pennsylvania and fish nymphs, and then transition into dry dropper or dry flies and keep it the same rig on my line. And like Josh, really the only situation that I would switch over would be for longer casts that I wanted to make. I might pull off that mono rig and use fly line. But
longer casts is a good point, and I should mention that this is not a system where you're going to fish 60 feet away, 50 feet away. No, probably not.
Yeah.
Right. For me, it's 20, 25, 30 feet away. 30's starting to push it. 35's really pushing it. 40 feet, on streamers, and we'll get to all that. But no, you're not going to cast more than 40, 45 feet away. However, I don't want to. Even when I have fly line on, I rarely want or need to. Bill?
One thing, you talked about sag, and so I don't know if that's self-explanatory, but the one point I want to make with the sag, so when the line sags, that weight will pull back your flies, and so the weight of a fly line will pull if you're trying to nymph, the weight of that fly line, the sag is what's pulling the flies back to you in a less natural drift.
It's not even just with nymphs. I mean, it happens with dry flies. That sag hanging off your rod tip, as you just explained, just pulls. It just pulls on the leader, which then pulls on the flies. Yeah. It's a problem.
Even drag in the water. Yeah. If you've ever cast dry flies on the mono rig, you notice that the currents have a lot less impact on that 20-pound Maxima than they do on a standard dry fly.
Sure.
floating fly line.
I think too, one of the things I like about it is when you try to fish other leaders for one thing all day that incorporates fly line, there's a certain amount of sacrifice that goes into each style.
Yeah.
And when you eliminate the fly line itself, you kind of also eliminate some of those sacrifices. So you can fish a streamer and a nymph on the same butt section and just make small adjustments to your like terminal tippet or something, and that's all you have to do.
That's nice.
But if you're the other way around, then there's a lot more work involved in changing, and it kind of eliminates some of those things.
That's awesome. We should talk about some of those changes in a bit.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about jump into styles here in a little bit, all the different ways that we like to use it. Like you said, you keep the changes easy.
Yep, absolutely.
And I would toss in the streamer. I honestly think it's the best wade fishing line to use for streamers, just with the ability to stay out of seams. It's by far my favorite.
Yeah, me too. I'm sure we're going to dig into the streamers here in a little bit. The thing for me is all the benefits of contact and therefore control over your nymph, which is so many people tight line nymphs. They've been doing it for years, and Euro nymphing is very popular. Euro nymphing really is tight line nymphing with nothing else attached to the leader. That means just the flies. So there's no split shot. Euro nymphing means there is no indicator. There can never really be an indicator if you're Euro nymphing. If you are maybe throwing a yarn indie or you attach a thingamabobber or something like that, you're no longer technically Euro nymphing. I mean, who cares what you call it, but technically you're not. And so all the Euro nymphing is very popular. And yet, like Bill's saying, you can take that contact and control now, all the same benefits transfer very, very well over to streamers, and I love it. Yeah. So you guys kind of, I think you're like me. I mean, you kind of do everything with it, So guys, will you tell me though what you like to use for your mono rig butt section? Because the butt section here really does the majority of the work. It functions like a fly line. And sure, the taper matters. And if you have a longer taper, okay, we talk about that. The taper and the sighter and the tippet matters. But really, what's doing most of the work is what you are using for your butt section. What do you guys use?
I think I'm the outlier. I like the 30-pound OPST laser line. The visibility of it, for me, outweighs the extra stiffness that comes with the Maxima leader. And so fishing smaller streams and getting stuck in trees occasionally and just the visibility of it to see where that line is, where it's traveling to. I prefer to have something that's more visible. I use the
Red Amnesia.
The Amnesia.
Yeah, you were on.
Yeah. I used
the Amnesia for a while.
I used the Amnesia I was on it for a while, and then I started to use the laser line, and the laser line just seems to I don't know if it has I want to say it feels like it has a finish on it or something that just makes it cast
it handles
smoother.
better. It does.
Yeah. Now, what do you think about the wintertime, Bill?
I don't have much problems with it. I guess maybe I stretch it a lot or...
Yeah, you're doing something.
Because I kind of got away from OPST because of the cold weather performance. I felt like it was hard for me to get the coils out of it.
Bill's got a secret to stretching it.
Yeah,
and keeping it
stretch it hard.
Stronger muscles.
Yeah,
that's right. He's just stronger than you.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. It's simple.
Fish it more. You got to get it out there.
Yeah.
You get used to the cold.
Toughen it up a bit.
Break it in.
That's a good point.
I like to fish Maxima Chameleon as my base. I do have a few spools of the Cortland Euro nymphing leader material, and I've been using that a lot for my butt sections as well. So I interchange that a fair amount, and I use the Euro nymphing Cortland material for my night leaders a lot as well. But I like both. Both are great. I do wish that the Cortland stuff came in a more visible color.
Either one, if Maxima or Cortland would throw just a little bit of tint in those materials, you'd have kind of the perfect butt section material for what I'm looking for. Maxima makes a high vis yellow, and they say it should. It should function just like the Chameleon, but it doesn't. It holds a coil more. It's a little stiffer. I've been using it
Yep.
for a transition section, actually. So it kind of extends my cider section, really.
I
But-
really wonder what colors
Sure.
would not do that. I'm like,
I know.
It'd be
Right.
really interesting to do a test like that
I
if
know.
we had the ability. Someday we're going to have Troutbitten leaders and we're going to do all the
I know.
testing to figure out what color, what dye has
I like
the least
that. I
impact
like
on the
that.
structural
Mhm.
integrity.
It seems like when
Red,
right,
red and
I agree,
orange.
because it seems like the yellow and greenish lines that we use tend to get stiffer and hold a coil more, especially in cold water. And you seem to be able to get away with it more. Less coil, like Trevor said, red and orange lines. But yeah, maybe someday we'll have some Troutbitten butt section material. Anything else? Anything else?
Yeah.
You using anything else, guys? Is everybody on thicker line, or you use thinner leaders?
I was going to say I generally fish the 20 pound just because by nature I change tactics so often that I like the backbone and the ability to turn over flies with the 20 pound. But if I know that all I'm going to do is tightline nymph all day, I like to use a bit lighter. 15 is really nice.
Uh-huh.
You can definitely tell a pretty sizable difference. 5 is super light.
Well-
5's a little light for me.
What's the difference,
right.
though? Will you tell us what the difference is?
Yeah, so like you can notice it, especially in the casting stroke. There's less weight involved in the casting stroke, and also when you find yourself casting further, the drag and the sag that occurs is very noticeable. I mean, it's very obvious. If you take the two and fish them side by side, you're like, "Ooh, I didn't think it would be this much."
I know, right?
But that's definitely the case, and it can be tempting to fish much further away from yourself when you have that lighter line.
It is. And is that always a good thing?
Right, exactly.
Right?
So it has its pros and cons that you have to always keep running in the back of your head.
Yeah, there's a huge difference in sag between
Yeah.
20-pound monofilament and 10, or sometimes I even go down to 5, what I call a micro leader.
Yeah.
And I don't prefer that micro. I don't prefer the thin, but they both give you a different advantage, and I fish them at different times.
For sure.
I'll say bring up one more thing here. I keep my butt section long enough to keep all the knots out of the guides. And maybe that's something unique to me, but I want to be able to shoot line. So I know some friends who build long tapers, a butt section, and then their taper that is 10 feet. And that will absolutely have knots in your guides. And I don't care how clean you tie a blood knot. I don't care if you put UV knot sense on that and cure it perfectly. I'm not even going to say it hangs up in the guides, but it stutters a bit in the guides. And if you're trying to do the versatile things that we're talking about, like throwing streamers and throwing indicator rigs sometimes at distance, those little stutters in the guides are not only annoying to me, but they will hold you back a little bit.
Yeah, they're like speed bumps for your casting stroke.
That's a great way to put it.
I hate them. If I want to cast, like I probably overdo the mono rig and put 50, 60,
that's a lot,
70 feet on, because eventually it's going to wear out, and then I'll just cut it off and have the next section readily available. But I despise that not hitting through the guides.
Me too.
I think it's extremely constricts your casting length.
So with that amount on, Bill, are you ever switching out for fly line?
Right. Good question.
Good question. So a lot of times I don't, but this year I've hit a couple hatches that I really wanted to switch out. And so what I've started to do is I had a Berkeley Trilene or like a Stren, like one of those old spools.
Oh, gotcha.
That are, I don't know, let's say they're like 3 inches wide. And so I just threw it in my vest. And if I wanted to switch out, I had a standard dry fly leader on a little foam spool. And that one I could quickly just wrap onto a bigger spool.
That's neat.
Yeah, Bill, I remember you texting me earlier this year during one of the hatches and saying how you'd kind of been pleasantly surprised by the dry fly presentation you were able to get on the mono rig.
Yeah. And before I had that nice little spool, I used a fly box. And that was not, I just had a fly box that I knew that I wasn't going to use because I had a hatch, and I just wrapped that mono leader around it because I didn't have something to put it on, and got back to the car and got something better. But
yeah, that efficiency is important, right? And I do similar things. I keep old chameleon spools to hold leaders on, and I also use, like you're saying, the foam loon rigging spools for kind of tippets and cider sections and stuff like that.
Yeah, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot for me to switch because, like Trevor was saying, like this year I started using that 30-pound or the Maxima, I felt like there was a big difference in the ability to use a dry fly with it.
That's big.
Yeah, right. At short distance, you can do it. We'll talk about that. Hey, so let's dig into the styles a little bit, right? For me, it all starts, I think for anybody, it really should start with tight line nymphing. Tight line nymphing is really the base of all of this. When I teach mono rig tactics, I encourage anglers to learn tight line nymphing first at close range in broken water. Close, I should say, is, let's say within 25 feet. And so fish close, learn what contact is. Contact on your sighter, learn to read that contact. Gain control of the nymphs and the whole rig. Then with that confidence, you can get into the other styles. But it starts with tight line nymphing. Let's start with this, guys. Where do you have the weight in your system? Where do you put the weight?
Yeah, so I know in classic Euro nymphing, a lot of the weight's built into the flies themselves. And that's certainly, a good majority of the time my flies have a bead head, whether that be tungsten or brass, but I'm really not shy to use split shot. And I think I've always ascribed to dialing in the weight specifically being more important than keeping my line free of split shot. And so if a particular fly that I want to fish requires some split shot, I like that and I'm okay with it. And there's even times where I feel like an unweighted fly with split shot fishes more naturally. The weight's always within the last 6 inches of my lead fly, but sometimes that's also on the tippet between my lead fly and my tag fly.
That was an interesting point, Trevor. Why do you think that sometimes unweighted fly fishes more naturally with split shot 5-6 inches in front of it?
That's a good question. Yeah, so I think that there are certain types of flies that mimic certain types of food for the fish that when they're weighted down so heavily and they fish, like a heavily weighted fly is not going to respond to subtleties in a current, right?
That's a good point.
And yet an unweighted fly with split shot attached at a certain length from it may appear to have a more lifelike presentation within the current. Yeah. And so I just think that sometimes matters. Sometimes it doesn't, but I think it does.
I'm with you on that. And I have there's a leaf in my fly box that has all unweighted flies or very, very lightly weighted flies. Same concept as what you're saying. There's a downside of split shot, and that's that it puts you out of touch with the fly because you are really in touch with the heaviest thing on your line. You throw split shot on, it's probably the heaviest thing on your line. But that's also the upside of split shot is now you're in touch with the split shot, and like Trevor, you're saying that the unweighted fly has, let's say 5 inches, 6 inches, wherever, of grace to move as the current wants it to. Can look more natural. Yeah,
absolutely.
I'm team anti-split shot.
Yeah, I know. That's right. So your weight,
don't like
the weight in your system is always in your flies, you're saying?
Yeah, I always like, so the primary weight is the what do we call it? The bottom fly or the point fly.
Yeah. Lead point fly.
That's where all my weight is, and then unless I'm fishing super high water, that's where all the weight is, and then the tag fly is just something small and light. Yeah. And so every time I feel like I fish split shot, you catch that 5 or 6 inch fish and he starts flopping, and that split shot just turns into a boomerang.
That's true. That's because of how you. No. That's because of how you fight fish. You just aerialize them and bring them in. Seriously, if you keep them under the water, that won't happen.
The little ones are the worst for that.
You just want to show them off and get them to jump.
Get here, buddy.
Yep, I know. I'm just kidding.
Now, do you ever put the heavier weight on the tag?
I tried it. I don't like it because then your strike detection on that point fly is pretty much gone.
I'm with you on that.
And like if you think about, like I'm holding up my hands now, but if you think about that fish that eats that top fly, in the pivot point of that bottom fly, is, let's say you have a 12-inch leader, that fish can run in a circle and you'll never feel
12-inch radius.
Yeah, you got 20 inches plus a knot in there to break up the
Yeah.
Some quick math there, darling.
Yeah.
Listen to this guy. Hey, all right. So another point, when we say tight line or contact nymphing, that doesn't mean we're necessarily always in touch like the whole time. It just means we're using a rig that is designed for contact, designed to be in touch with the flies at any moment that we choose. And honestly, like the magic of it all is being slightly in touch, slightly out of touch, in touch, out of touch. And when you really learn to ride that line, if you're nymphing, let that fly drop slightly out of touch, but knowing exactly where your contact is, letting it drop. And when it's dropped into the strike zone, then we kind of lead it through. So there's a drop and then there's a lead. There's a free fall and then there's a drift. And the point is, we're not always in touch. Tight line nymphing doesn't always mean tight to the flies.
The trip we had last week and we were working with the guys, I was trying to explain, like, if you can put just a ever so subtle amount of slack in your sighter,
yes,
when a fish or a rock hits it, that sighter will jump a lot more and it will be a better strike indicator because it has that slack, and so when it hits something, it reacts better.
No
I hear that too.
Versus if it's, if you have it pinned,
you may not feel it as much, but you're gonna see it.
Yeah,
that's a cool point, Josh. If you're super in touch, and sometimes lots of times I overweight, so I will have that extra contact, that extra feel, right?
Yeah, that's definitely something I think is a really common maybe mystery to people, is how I think you have an article titled not all that tight or not too tight, because the name itself is kind of confusing. Well, tight line nymphing, that means I have to be a straight line to my flies the whole time. But I know from my guiding trips, one of the top things I always stress is that line recovery. Some guys will cast straight in with a tight line. Some will cast in with a ton of slack and won't have it recover till the drift is over. Getting that slack management and line management correct is all it comes down to.
Now, sort of implicit within what you're talking about is probably dialing in a particular weight that fits the current you're fishing, right? Because to be not fully in touch with the flies that you're fishing, or to be able to be kind of in and out of touch, if you have a fly that's way overweighted for the current you're fishing, that thing's on the bottom in 2 seconds,
sure.
right?
It's all
you can't get out of there
and all relative.
So how much dialing in of weight do you guys do? And if you're not doing it with split shot, are you changing fly weights?
Yeah, I think one thing I also think about a lot, and this isn't ignoring your point, but is the angle of the sighter and angle of the flies as they enter the water. So I may be dialing in a certain weight, but I also might be dialing in a certain angle to my sighter. And that's something I almost concentrate. I don't know if it's a good thing or not, but I find that's my first go-to before changing weights, is changing angles.
Oh, yeah, because there's so many different ways to get deeper. Yeah. Everybody thinks like, I got to get deeper, so I'm going to add weight. I mean, there's so many different ways. Get everything in one scene. Think about that. That's a great way to get deeper,
The angle of your sighter is going to, that puts more or less line under the water, right? And more or less line under the water, that's more drag on that particular amount of line that's pulling that particular fly. So I think that what you're saying is exactly what I'm talking about.
Cool.
Is dialing in that weight.
Now, some days they may prefer a lighter weighted fly, and you'll get to that eventually. But that's definitely my first tactic.
I probably fish heavier flies than most.
Yeah, I know you do. You also fish stiffer tippet than most. So those two things will kind of go hand in hand.
Yeah. I'm mostly at 3X.
Right. And boy, a lot of people are going to hear that and go, what? 3X?
Yeah.
Nymphing? What?
But look at this guy's Instagram page and tell him it doesn't work.
He's right. Bill catches plenty of fish.
Fish with him, right? Gosh, I don't think any of us have ever outfished Bill.
Yeah. Yeah, you did. This year, the one day I got skunked.
Maybe.
One day. Listen to this guy.
Yeah.
It was my birthday, okay? I deserved it. I deserved that.
Yeah. But I don't know. I like that versatility to just, instead of, if I put 3X on, and now I can switch to a streamer.
Oh, I hear that
and
too.
not have it break off. And
that is a nice benefit.
Bill, you and I were out this spring, and that exact issue came up where I had I think I had 4 or 5X on and switched over to streamers on the mono rig and set the hook too hard and broke off a good fish. And yeah.
And what I want you to repeat what you said like 2 days before that.
What did I say?
Remember?
No.
I said, man, I never break off fish.
Oh no.
I said, you wait, we'll see about that. And then,
yeah, it's a terrible thing to say.
It is.
I deserved that.
So, hey, let's move on to indicator nymphing or suspender nymphing, right? So once the tightline game is learned at close range, once those skills are understood and under control, adding an indicator to a tightline rig is a deadly variation. And I've had people tell me, well, you can't do both things, either your tightline nymphing or your indicator nymphing. But that's not true. Not at all. And that kind of shows a limited understanding of things. It fundamentally misses something that's very special. We add an indicator to this tightline rig that we're using. I think we all add it below the sighter. So now it's, right below the sighter on our tippet section, and it's slidable up and down. Guys, though, when do you add an indicator to the rig? For what reason? Why do you add an Indy?
So I'll correct you. I added on the sighter.
Do you? Well, you're doing it wrong, Bill.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
I do everything back.
I do that sometimes.
That's right. That's why you're here. That's the only reason you're
Yeah.
here. Just
I'm
to be
just
the
here to-
contrarian.
Yeah, I do too.
I do that sometimes as well, but it's always low on the cider.
Yeah. Go ahead. Tell it.
like-
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us why.
So the cider is. So I don't fish the rubber bands off of a thingamabobber like you do.
That's all right.
I fish just the simple, normal way, thread it through and go over the line. And so I think my cider's at like 1 or 2X. And so I just feel more comfortable with that. Kind of creates the kink in the line. I'd rather it be in the cider. And so I like it kind of there. It's mostly in the last inch or two of the cider. And so at that point, it's on a thicker tippet, but the majority of the line under the water is all the same.
Yeah.
Bill, how long is your tippet section, though?
Most times, not more than maybe 3.5 feet from the cider to the bottom ply.
That's shorter.
That makes sense then.
Yeah.
Dom, I think to answer your question, the majority of the time when I'm fishing a bobber or an indicator, it's so that I can get more distance. It's so that I can get over water that is going to disrupt my drift, or it's so that
Right on.
if I can't wade into position to fish a spot that I think is fishy, then I'm going to put on an indicator so that I can get far out and lift that line up and over that water.
So it extends your range.
Yeah, but there are times when it's not only that. There are times when I'm just like, man, nothing's working. I'm going to try this. It's going to adjust my drift a little bit, and sometimes that's all it takes.
I love it. Yeah, I've fished up 100 yards of water, tight lining. I catch a couple fish and I go, oh my, I should have caught more fish than that. I know there's a lot more fish. What can I do different? I literally will go back down to the bottom of that 100 yards and now throw the Indy on, whether that's a Dorsey yarn indicator or a small thingamabobber. And all of a sudden, like you're saying, something changes.
Yep.
We'll talk about that some other time. But yeah, I mean, it's something to do differently.
Yeah, I had the identical thing happen to me this weekend.
Right on.
Definitely true.
I like the advantage of it is if you're fishing a uniform depth section of a river, you can pin it at that depth that you want that fly to sink at. You can throw it further, you can get a longer drift, and you can get a more consistent drift to tight line that indicator, and that fly is going to consistently track in that water column you want it to do so.
Yeah. You just said to tight line that indicator. And I think some people are not going to understand that. What we're saying is the fly hits, then the Indy hits, and then we want to keep everything up to that indicator off the water. And it's what I like to call the tight line advantage. Yes, sometimes we'll lay a little bit of that cider on the water or whatever, some of that leader. But the ideal situation is that you just keep everything up off the water. Now you don't have to mend. You don't have to deal with any cross currents. Yeah, that's how it really extends your range.
I think bobber fishing, going right off of that, is sometimes categorized as like a thoughtless method of fishing. But there's so much more to it. Like we just said, you can tuck cast a bobber. You can take the slack out of a bobber. You can land it tight. You can do all those things. It's not just chuck and duck and hope something happens for you.
Yep.
Not at all, especially on this rig. If I've tried to do it with a fly line and a 9-foot leader and, try to get the same positioning. But what we're saying, and this might be the most important thing of the podcast, honestly, we can get the fly to go into one seam and then kick that bobber over into the exact same seam, even if we're not casting upstream, but we can do it casting directly across to the bank.
Yeah.
And get that bobber or indicate, whatever your Indy is, yarn Indy, get the fly to go in, Dorsey yarn indicator kicks over into the exact same seam.
Yep.
And part of that, though, is how the leader is designed.
For sure.
But go ahead.
Yeah. And it's critical to get those two things in the same seam, because if they're in different seams, it's a different speed, and so you're going to lose your strike detection.
So true. Yeah. Yeah, this stuff, so it's really just a deadly variation. So important. I do it when it's windy sometimes. Like Josh said, I do it when I can't wade into great position to tight line nymph. I do it to ride at fixed depth, like Bill was saying. And, sometimes I just do it to relax and to focus on something different. It can be harder in some ways because you have to get everything done in the cast.
Yeah.
Right. All that alignment, like we're saying, that it's really, there's an aerial mend in there.
Just like a dry fly.
It's difficult. Very, very. It can be somewhat or very difficult. Yeah. Just like a dry fly too.
And it also needs to be a little slower because you have another fixed point with that bobber, like the cast. To me, things have to slow down a little bit. If you start to get too fast, back and forth, tendency of getting more tangles and mess ups.
Yeah, I hear that, especially if you have two flies below that Indy, and if your Indy is a hard indicator like a thingamabobber. The yarn, I feel like I can cast it just as hard as I want to, because we should really do a podcast on all these details. I'd love it. Very, very similar is tight line dry dropper. It's very much an extension of the tight line to the indicator concept. You guys do it a lot, I think, right?
Yeah, boy, this is one of my favorite techniques, and one that I really fell in love with a couple of years ago fishing springtime around here on our streams, and really loved the versatility of even taking my standard tight line 2 nymph rig and pulling the nymph off my tag fly and applying a dry fly to that tag position and fishing dry dropper from the tag. The level of control that gives you and the level of kind of flies in 2 different orientations in the water and kind of the applications that offers for fishing pre-hatch and hatch kind of conditions is just such a cool way to pick apart a stream, especially some of our smaller streams.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably for me right now, that's probably the only version of the dry fly that I fish on the mono rig. And that might be because I'm not fishing all that often because of the stage of life. And
with 3 kids under 3.
But seriously, it's I remember times when that was extremely different. When I was just fishing all the time, that was no problem, and I did it all the time. But generally right now, if I'm going to fish a dry fly, usually there's a nymph under it to help me cast a little bit better.
I was going to ask you to touch on the slipping contact tactic that you write about, because that's something I like to do, but I thought you could probably explain that pretty well.
Now, do you mean slipping contact with the tight line dry dropper?
Yeah.
What I generally do with that tight line dry dropper, so we're talking about having, again, that tight line advantage to the dry fly. So we are in touch with the dry without any line on the water. So the only thing that influences that dry fly is our connection to it. Some surface current, and of course the nymph underneath. And where is that nymph? If the nymph gets down in the strike zone, which you can read about a lot on Troutbitten, maybe I talk about it a lot. That strike zone's going slower. It's very near the bottom, a cushion of the water. Nymph gets in there, it actually will slow the dry fly down. It'll do the same thing with an Indy if you have this tight line advantage with all the line up. So the slipping contact thing, I often will. I think about it more, Austin, honestly, to just when I'm pure tight lining.
Yeah.
I'm in contact, I'm out. I'm in and out.
Right, exactly.
But for me, how it applies to the dry dropper, lots of times. So what we're doing on this tight line dry dropper, this stuff's great because it's very, I think it's very technical. I think people love this. What we're doing is allowing that dry fly to suspend. Let's just say it's 30 inches underneath. Suspend a number 14 beadhead pheasant tail, and it's suspending it. And yet, at some point, because I'll tie the dry fly off, like Trevor was saying, off of a tag.
Yep.
Almost always when I'm doing this. And so I'm allowing the dry fly to suspend it. That's great. And I'm tight to my dry. And then there will be points where I go, you know what? I want to kind of get in touch with that number 14 pheasant tail a little bit and kind of lead it through because I know it's going to touch if I don't. And now I'm in control, or my rod tip is in control of that pheasant tail, and not so much the fly, not so much the dry fly. And then, maybe things flatten out a little bit or deepen up a bit. And then I go, okay, let the dry fly do the work again. Yeah. That's what I kind of call slip in contact.
And we're talking about that. Inches, because your tag is only what, 5 inches?
Yeah.
Something like that with the dry fly. And so you're talking about when that's added to an angle, you're talking about only 3 inches of lifting that rod, and then you're in contact, and then you're back out of contact.
It's so fun.
That's what I mean. It's real precise stuff, and
it is.
But that's the fun of it. That's why we go out there every day. That's what keeps us motivated. Again, like we said earlier, to learn the next thing and to work on it.
I really, and I'll be the weirdo again, I really don't like that tag end dry.
I know.
I like I like it all in a pretty little line of drop, tip it to dry fly, tie off the bend to the dry fly, and that's your nymph. And most times I'm only fishing that dropper any more. The more I fish that rig of dry dropper, the more I see it as probably the worst rig to detect strikes, because it's hard to get that weight just right where the dry fly is in contact with the nymph. Because if you fish a lighter dropper, the fly could be again in different seams, and you could have less of a chance of detecting that strike. And so sometimes it's like a balancing act between, do I want to sink the dry fly? Do I want it to be just enough weight where it's like starting to sink the dry fly? But it's a balancing act.
Oh, I like what you say there, a balancing act for sure. It is. So when most people think of dry dropper, they're going to say, well, I'm going to throw my my big stimulator on, your big stonefly foam hopper or something on. And then I'm just, I'm going to throw whatever I want underneath. No. What you just said, Bill, to me is also important. I said beadhead pheasant tail 14. So often, the way I tie my number 14 clink hammers or my number 14 parachute Adams, I know, because they're from my box, that those two will float very well together. You said about your dry fly going under. I never really want my dry fly to go under unless fish eats the nymph, and then boom, goes under. I do like it to be, right. I do like it to be right on the edge of going under. And so anyway, you do have to find that balance. There has to be, if there's not enough weight, then there's too much air resistance in the dry. And if there's too much air resistance in the dry, everything doesn't want to turn over. There has to be that balance. For me, though, Trevor said this is too. It's like it really is. It's my favorite way to fish a tight line rig. It has become that. You can have such amazing control over your dry fly. I don't fish it to get all the way down. I don't fish it when I'm obsessed about getting great strike zone rides. I fish it when I believe or I know that trout are coming up through the water column. They're interested in perhaps emerging insects, or for whatever reason they're coming.
Absolutely.
Yeah. For whatever reason, they're coming out of the strike zone. They're willing to eat above them. And then, because this is also a fixed line system. Yeah. I also set up a slidable dry dropper. That's another conversation. For the most part, I stick with kind of a fixed length, and I'm experiencing, on the water, hey, they're coming up. Hey, they'll come. They keep eating my tag. So then, and now I see risers too. It's just for me, it's a beautiful way to fish.
Yeah. And I think it expands out that time frame that you can fish in that exciting way, from like when a lot of our hatches that occur at particular times a day, if you're fishing purely dry fly 2 hours before that really top water hatch begins, you might not get a lot of action on your dry fly. And yet if you're fishing that dry dropper system, you're really capitalizing on the momentum of that feeding frenzy. And as those fish are becoming more and more active higher in the water column, you're expanding the number of hours that you're enjoying that intense action. It's just such an exciting way to fish.
I think it's so darn exciting because you can, when they eat that dry fly, it's like, I mean, you are now in touch with your dry fly. Normally when they eat our dry fly, we have some slack, or they probably wouldn't have eaten it. We have some slack up to the dry so it can get a real nice dead free drift. Not in this case. We are tight to the dry, and bang, they eat it. Yep. And as soon as a trout eats on the top, it almost always, boom, turns right down, wants to go down.
Yep.
And so you have to give the fly, you don't really need a set almost, but you tighten up, and then you have to give the trout not slack. You have to give it a chance to get back down. And it's a very exhilarating moment when they take that dry fly, and it'll happen dozens of times a night, if you have things going in an evening the right way.
I've done it recently on small streams, and I've started to use it more and more because small streams, you have small quarters, and when you use fly line, that fly line has that sag, and it wants to pull, like you're in a tight quarter, and it wants to pull that nymph or that dry dropper back faster, and so you're kind of mending or managing that line, and it makes it more tedious. Where if you have that mono rig, it's not as heavy, and it's easier to manage kind of the tracking or the line of the flies coming back to you, because you can just raise the rod a little bit, retrieve it with your hand. It's smoother, and it happens in a slower because it's less weight. Yeah,
it sure is. What you're saying is, again, that control. We're taking that tight line advantage over to another tactic. In this case, the tight line dry dropper. The tight line advantage gives us that contact and that control. So instead of laying line on the water, we can be tight to that dry fly. And that's a very big deal, just like it's a very big deal to be tight to the Indy or tight all the way directly to our nymph. Having these options, this versatility, to me, is the way I like to fish. I know that's kind of what you're saying there too, Bill. And so we can take that same advantage, tight line advantage, then over to streamers. And streamers on a mono rig is really one of my favorite ways to fish too. When I started using this tight line concept with streamers, it just made sense. You have ultimate control over the depth, the angle, drop rate, speed, even the head angle, everything. I mean, we can make the streamer do whatever we want at any moment through the drift, almost. I mean, because we're not at the mercy of the fly line, what the fly line wants to do. The streamer essentially follows the rod tip rather than the fly line. But also, if we want to lay line on the water and have the streamer follow a bow in the leader, we can do that too. How do you guys like to fish for streamers? Let me ask, do you make changes to the base mono rig that we've talked about?
I personally don't change anything to my butt section or sighter. The only thing I do is clip my tippet off, and I have like an 8-pound mono pre-rigged thing on a loon rigging foam, and I switch them out.
Yeah.
Other than that, I don't have any problems with turnover.
Based on some experiences earlier this year, I do like to make sure my tippet is sufficient for the types of hook sets that I want to make with a streamer. When I'm casting a streamer on the mono rig, depending upon the streamer, I'm not always using the weight of the butt section to cast that streamer. I'm sometimes using the weight of the streamer to cast.
Sure.
And so, using like more of an oval cast, and, people can refer to the video that you put out on fishing streamers on the mono rig earlier this year on YouTube.
Yeah.
But when I'm casting like that, I don't really care as much about my butt section as I do about the tippet I'm using, I guess. So that's the one thing I would switch up.
So you go to what? 1X, 2X, OX?
Yeah, OX to 2X.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range.
Anybody else? You switch out, guys?
Yeah, I switch out tippet, just like Trevor's saying. When I'm switching to streamers, I don't switch out my mono rig very often. Mm-hmm. And I don't even carry OTA 2. I just carry 1. And that's what I switch out to when I make the switch. That's cool. Yeah.
And Bill, you were saying earlier that you just you have 3X because it'll kind of do everything for you. as your terminal tippet.
I would say if I'm all in on the day and I'm throwing streamers, or if I've caught a couple fish and I know I want to have extra confidence, I'll go to 1X or 10 pound fluoro.
Right on. That's pretty much what I do too. And it also has a lot to do with streamer size, like Trevor was saying. For me, I'm on OX or 1X if I'm fishing for a long length of time, bigger streamers. Because when I fish a big streamer, I almost always fish a small streamer up above it. And that's just me. We'll talk about that some other time. And I don't want to fish that on 4X or even 3X for extended periods of time. But what I do a lot lately is I call it a crossover technique, where it's I'll take smallish streamers that are 1.5 to maybe even 2.5 inches long, but not much bigger. And I'll treat them like a nymph for a while, for half the drift, let's say. Yeah, it's fun. And then just sort of pulse them or jig them or just half strip them, just 2-3 inch strips or something. And then maybe even with that same setup, I'll take the next cast straight to the bank and strip like you would a normal stream. I don't want to say normal, but
more standard,
more common streamer approach. And so I do that perhaps by just cutting off my point nymph and throwing on that smallish streamer. It's a lot of fun, and that's a real quick way to do it. We spend so much time trying to get dead drifts, whether it's on a dry fly, but it's, on a nymph. Dead drift. Try to perfect that. And then I love throwing on that little crossover streamer and just doing something different. Show them something different. If they rejected your perfect, you're trying for a perfect dead drift, throw something like that on. That's what I work on a lot lately.
I love fishing streamers that aren't much bigger than my biggest nymphs, Where and let's say the standard streamer approach is you fish downstream and you cover a lot of water. And I think what you're describing in the crossover technique is that you can fish it very similarly to what you would if you were nymphing all day. You fish upstream and you fish flies that aren't a whole lot bigger than your biggest nymphs that you might fish for the day. And you almost nymph them, you just give them a little bit of life. And it kind of incorporates some freedom into that, the rigidness of dead drift. You get to say, I don't have to do that with this fly. With this fly,
that's perfect.
This fly's got legs. This fly's got fins. This, this fly I can give a little bit of life to.
That I agree with that. I kind of subscribe to the low and slow method as my preferred streamer kind of go-to. And one thing that the mono rig does is allow me to hold and pause and stall my flies out in one specific area that may be a cross stream or like one thing I love to do is after high water is go out and find those hard runs and fish the soft water on the backside between it and the bank and just hold those streamers in that soft water between the bank and the hard runs. And if you were to throw a fly line across that without throwing some sort of dramatic downstream mend, it's going to get ripped out right away. And even so, you'll get like 2 seconds of look. With the mono rig, you're able to maximize the amount of time that the fly is drifting with the same parallel line as the bank. And that's something I think about.
That's sweet.
That's huge.
And you're in contact the whole time. Right. Where fly line, those mends and those things cost you contact.
And then the fish eats right as you start to mend.
For sure.
Yeah, you miss them.
You're done. But do you guys fish like the big? Josh talked about the bigger streamers. If I fish bigger streamers, I still like to present them upstream and retrieve them back to me.
Yeah, I still do that. Upstream and across. 45, maybe it's standard, whatever. For me, 45. Yeah, and Josh was saying like fish downstream, and as soon as he said it, I thought I wanted to kind of point that out too. For me, I'll fish downstream because I want to cover a lot of water, and I'll let the river help me to walk or wade downstream, and yet I still cast mostly either across or across and up, like you said, Bill. So to me, it's all about head position. It's about the head position of that streamer. I'm sure we're going to do podcasts on streamers too, because I know we all fish streamers. We all love it. And there's so many cool things like that about like head position. Trout don't care what the head position of a nymph is. It's too small of a little creature there for them to say, oh, well, that head's faced upstream. I'm not going to eat it. But boy, I think they really do care about the head position of a streamer for a number of reasons. But I'm going to move us on here to dry flies on the mono rig. So I fished a mono rig for 10 years or more, maybe, before I ever really gave this a chance. And I'm talking about just pure dries here. No nymph, no weight attached. I remember it was our friend Sloop who gave me the idea and the confidence really to try it out. Sloop just clipped off the nymphs, tied on a dry fly to the point, and caught the rising trout in front of him. These days, I sometimes adapt the tippet section, change it up a little bit, but plenty of times I do the same as Sloop did, and I'm sure he still does. I just clip, tie on a dry, and go, and it's a great solution for short range targets. And in some ways, the drift is better than it is with a fly line. Once again, you have less mass out there to be catching currents. Do you guys fish the mono rig for dries much?
I have this year. I know early on the blue wing olive hatch here.
Yeah. Sometimes
you get 5 minutes of good rising fish. Sometimes you get, a couple fish here and there, or you're just, fishing along and you might find one tuck to the bank that's sipping olives. And so instead of switching that whole leader out, I just cut it off and I'll tie an 18 olive on 3X. And if you're presenting it fly first to that fish, he never sees the 3X. And so I don't think there needs to be a big difference. And I think that 3X gives you the ability to push those dry flies, even the smaller ones, out a little further because it has a little more mass.
Yeah. I'll do it on 3X sometimes, but let's say I'm usually going 5X with my tippet, and I kind of like the little wave of the S curves. I can still get them. I just kind of do a stop and drop, standard fly line style cast, a little bit extra speed. Anyway, it gives me that same, because I don't really like to be tight as soon as it hits the water. To me, I guess that's the major point that I want to make. In all this, we've been talking about being tight to the flies. But when I'm fishing dry flies on a mono rig, I still want S curves. So I technically don't really want to be tight to my dry fly when I'm fishing it.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think a lot of our smaller streams kind of highlight the advantages of the mono rig dry fly technique versus the drawbacks maybe of distance.
Yeah.
I've really loved just kind of in some complicated currents where you have fish rising across maybe 2 or 3 different types of currents. I've really loved the ability to cast the mono rig with the dry fly and just see that decreased impact of the current on my leader versus the fly line. And so I don't always set up specifically to be fishing a dry fly on the mono rig, but when the opportunity presents itself, I've really been pleasantly surprised more than once with the opportunities that it afforded me just because of that delicate presentation, decreased drag, the ability to cast, and then when needed, lift that fly line or lift that, butt section and leader off the water to kind of reduce drag across a couple of complex currents. So I really love it, but I admit that I don't do it often.
Right. I will point out it's very similar to Tenkara. It really is. With the Tenkara concept is very similar to this. And when you're throwing a dry fly, what you were saying there, Trevor, you can lift that line off and almost be, you can be in touch with your dry if you want to be. Although, you're going to get some sag and some drag coming back, and it's certain situations, hard to describe all that. But the downside, though, as you pointed out, is that we have a limited range there. Boy, I mean, I'm not casting a dry fly on a mono rig 45 feet, 40 feet even, probably. And I'm not going to cast the number 12 humpy or some other bushy fly. It has to be streamlined. Bill.
I like the I like the bushy
That's because you're using 3X though too.
I use that 3X.
That's cool. That's cool. That's why I love it.
Yeah. Bill and his slate drake. We were out on a stream earlier this year, and man, you were fishing a size 8. I don't know what.
It's a sparrow.
Yeah, I know.
Small bird.
Exactly.
So we talked about the downside of the length. You're not going to cast real far away. But likewise, without a fly line, we don't have the option for sort of directional changes or the subtle curves at the end of the cast. I love casting dry flies, as we all do, with fly line. With fly line, it gives you all these subtle variations you can do. It also gives you the distance. And that's what the fly line's made for. So we use it. I love fishing dries. It suits the job. But fishing dry flies on the mono rig is a great option for us when we just want to quickly throw dries at a couple risers or pick apart a few places on the bank. Do something a little different for a second. So guys, let's talk about fly rods. One more thing. The most common question I get about the mono rig is what fly rod to choose. In so many of the Troutbitten articles, I've made my own preferences known. I choose a versatile rod rather than a specialized rod, so I can efficiently perform all the tactics we just discussed. I rarely choose what you'd call a Euro nymphing rod or a specialized rod. Instead, my favorite rods are usually 10-foot 4-weights, and specifically, I love the Hardy Ultralight and the Orvis H3F. A lot of fantastic rods out there. My main point is that I like a very versatile tool. So, each of you, what do you guys use these days?
So I'm a Thomas and Thomas guy.
Yeah, rod you'll someday own.
Oh, right.
The rod you'll someday own. I've been using the Contact 2 series, and the 10-foot 3-weight is my go-to rod. I find that really, really handles both a matched fly line as well as the mono rig really well. Nice. It has a lot of speed and recovery. It very quickly dampens vibration. It's a responsive rod. It's sensitive, and yet it's got a really good backbone. And so I find that I can fight good fish and land them quickly. I do have the Contact 2 10-foot 8-inch 4-weight as well.
Yeah. And
I do like that rod in certain situations. Some bigger water, I tend to favor it. But the 10-foot 3-weight is my go-to versatile all-around rod.
Listen to this guy. He knows exactly why he likes his rods.
Yeah.
I think he wrote this down.
He's talking
somewhere.
about dampening and speed and accuracy.
Every extra 20 feet of river length, I add 2 inches to my rod. No. Okay.
Yes.
I'm gonna. So right now, I'm fishing a 10-foot 4-weight Sage X, and I love it. It's the nicest rod I've ever owned. But I'm gonna make a case for saying the rod that you should be fishing the mono rig on is the one that you currently own and fish most often.
Oh, that's
just
fantastic.
because it's very recent that I've been able to start fishing higher end rods, and I've been fishing the mono rig on low to mid range rods for very many years, and it works great.
Yeah, I did it for a decade.
Yep.
I mean, I fished a St. Croix Avid, which is, you don't need the specialized rod. You really don't. And that rod was an 8.5-foot 5-weight.
Right.
In some ways, it taught me things that I'm really glad that I still do. It taught me to stay close because it was 8.5.
Good point.
And it taught me to use that I had power available. The trouble for me with a 2-weight, for example, is they flex a lot too much for me, and there isn't enough power in those rods. I'm not saying power to land a fish. I'm talking about power, and it's not even that they can't turn over. I want them to turn it over faster. I want to have that option when I'm tuck casting with the Dorsey that I've attached, and I have, 2 number 14 nymphs on. I like power. I build it into the leader. I want it in the rod.
I think that speed and the power gives you way more accuracy.
Agreed. Totally agree.
When you have to take the rod back and take a little nap before that rod loads, because it's a 10.5, 11-foot 2-weight. It takes a long time for it to load, and you can adjust them short over time, but I just don't feel like it's as accurate. Yeah,
and well, if you're fishing a size 16, a single size 16, it'd probably be fantastic. Again, what you just said, the 11-foot 2-weight, is a very specialized tool, and that's not really what we're talking about here tonight. Mostly we're talking about the versatility of the mono rig and all these things that we love to do with it. Austin, what's your go-to rod?
Yeah, so I'm going to kind of piggyback off of some of these points. I'm in the same camp as Josh. You don't need a high-end rod to do this. I built a rod and fished that forever, super heavy, super bad, but that's what I built the backbone of my Euro nymphing or tight line skills on. And again, some of those deficiencies carried over into nicer rods. Having a nicer rod, though, I will say, does help. One of the things that is most noticeable between a lower end rod versus a higher tier rod is that rod tip recovery. When you make a cast and you watch the rod tip shake,
for sure.
and it's not done shaking until it's past you, that's not really helpful. But when you make that cast and it stabilizes like so quickly, you've got a stable drift. And the better you can stabilize your sighter and the faster you can stabilize your sighter, you're better off in every way.
Control and contact comes quickly.
So that's one thing that I will point out. Right now I'm fishing a 10-foot 5-weight H3. I've always been a 10-foot 5-weight guy. I just like the little bit of extra stiffness to them that a 4-weight just doesn't quite get for me.
Yeah, it's the power. Yep. Yeah, to do all those different things we're talking about. But Austin, do you feel like if you want to fish a single 16, just a size 16 beadhead pheasant tail, I mean, can you do that with your 5-weight?
Yeah, I could.
I know. Yeah, absolutely, no problem. And you can feel it. The rod will flex enough for you.
Right.
Again, because of how the way the way the leader is built and how you cast it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I know you pointed that out earlier, but it is casting, not lobbing. And we have a casting stroke that is formulated and not just straight over your head and dunk them in the water. It's not that. We're not fishing that way.
No, and you can catch plenty of fish that way. But
right.
Yeah, the way we're talking about. Yeah, it's like Bill said, you keep the speed in there and the power, and that's really where you get accuracy. Accuracy, not just about where the fly goes, but where the tippet goes.
Yeah.
Wherever that tippet is so important. That's probably more important than where the fly goes. That's where it's going next.
And the trajectory of it.
Yes, the angle, how steep is it going in if we're talking about a nymph. Bill, you're the last guy. What are you fishing with?
So I fish 2 rods primarily. I like the Scott Radiant, the 10-foot 5 for bigger waters. And I fish a 10-foot 4 H3, but I also fish a lot of the 9-foot. I have a 9-foot 4-weight. That's a Cabela's LSI. That's a lower end rod. And I love that rod, and it's fast. Like I always, joke, just give me a 2x4 with eyes on it because I want a fast rod. So I don't want to wait for it to load.
Yeah.
Take it back, and it makes it so more versatile with streamers, with nymphs, with indicators to have the power to do that stuff.
Yeah, I think that's great. So all of us, when we talked about each style, when we talk about what we like best, when we talk about the rods that we're using, there's a lot of similarities, even in the butt sections and stuff like that. But there's differences, and that's just within the 5 of us. So the standard mono rig Troutbitten style is a hybrid system for fishing every kind of fly and for doing almost anything you can do on a fly rod, but now with less sag, less drag, more contact, and therefore more control. Like Austin said, it's a casting system where the leader performs like a fly line, and the mono rig is simply an elegant way to fish with a fly rod. Sure, there are many ways to tie up a tightline rig, and even more ways to fish it. But if you build a rig for turnover, for power in the casting and options in the presentation, then you really have an extremely versatile tool in your hands. I know there's a lot more to say here, and maybe you have a lot of questions about all of this. So I invite you to check out the Mono Rig articles on Troutbitten. There are now hundreds of them, but please also get in touch if you have questions. Likewise, if you like to hear a topic covered on this podcast, please let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Josh, will you read us out?
Yeah, man. Remember, Troutbitten.com is a free resource for all anglers, so dig in and check it out. Navigate through the menus and find what you like. Share it, leave a comment. Use the search page if you're looking for something specific. Navigate by way of the categories and tags, too. Thank you so much for listening. Please give the show a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and leave a comment. That really helps. Until next time, friends, fish hard, enjoy the day, and find your life on the water.